Recognizing there is human suffering all over this world in the course of natural and human catastrophes, we ring our gong each Sunday morning to pause together to remember, to grieve, to try to comprehend some of this suffering and struggle. This week, we surpassed 2 heartbreaking milestones in the myriad of losses to COVID-19, exceeding 2.5 million deaths worldwide and 500,000 deaths here in the United States. It is near impossible to comprehend the weight of these numbers. Each one of those numbers, a life, precious and irreplaceable. Each one of those people who loved and were loved. In this recognition, we hold too the intersecting and compounding effects of this pandemic, the ways that it colludes with structural racism, inequity, and oppression, the ways that this torrent of loss is intensified for people of color, poor and working class people, immigrants, and people with disabilities. We hold in our hearts all of the people now at greater risk in this pandemic. As a result, the criminalization of migration, remembering especially as we have since June of 2019, the over 500 children permanently separated from their families. No amount of strikes of our gong can fully hold the weight of such tremendous loss. And so we strike our gong this morning, but once, that in its ringing we might connect each one of us with one of those lives, one of those children, one of those 500,000 people here in the United States, those 2.5 million people around the world whose lives this pandemic has cut short. That we might stand in our one precious life and hold in reverence and mourning one other, that from that place we might ease the tide of human suffering this coming week, however so we can. We'll let its ringing reverberate in a moment of shared silence.
Spirit of life and love, great mystery that binds our lives together. We gather this morning as pieces of a whole, with appreciation for our edges, for our individual sovereignty, and the dignity brought by self-determination. With gratitude for the ways that together we can nurture community, built on relationships defined by trust and mutual accountability. And we gather with reverence for the mystery beyond our naming that moves among and between us. We know this week especially of the deep ways our lives impact one another, a truth laid more bare than ever in this challenging time. Support us in meeting this truth not by scarcity or fear, but with courageous vulnerability, finding solace in the recognition that our thriving is bound up together. May we grow in our love and compassion for ourselves, trusting in the mysterious ways that love and compassion ripple out. May we treat ourselves and each other with rigor and gentleness as we grow together. As we live into this messy, imperfect work of living in community, in covenant with one another, may we hold well this sacred balance, knowing that our liberation is both collective and co-created, and honoring all the while the unique and irreplaceable gifts that each one of us bring. May we know that each one of us is precious. And as Adrienne Marie Brown writes, may we break every cycle that makes us forget this. May it be so. Amen.
Return again, return again, return to the home of your soul. Return again, return again, return to the home of your soul. Return to who you are, return to what you are, return to where you are, born and reborn again. Return to who you are, return to what you are, return to where you are, born and reborn. Return to who you are, return to what you are, return to where you are, born and reborn again. Return to who you are, return to what you are, return to where you are, born and reborn. Return again, return again, return to the home of your soul. Return again, return again, return to the home of your soul.
Hi, I'm Liz Strand. I'm a longtime member of UUSF and was recently elected to our Board of Trustees. As part of my work on the board, I joined the Journey to Wholeness Racial Justice Group, and within that, I'm working on the 8th Principle Task Force. In case you didn't know, there's an 8th principle that could be added to our traditional 7 principles, and it's already been adopted by more than 25 congregations throughout the country. As a board member, I was honored to be part of the recent unanimous vote to approve the board charge to the 8th Principle Task Force, so we're official. I've been truly inspired by the wellspring of activity that has emerged from this work, and Mari and I are with you today because we want to bring you in on the project. But more about me. Over 50 years ago, I was lucky enough to transfer in to San Francisco State College just before the historic student strike there that started in November of '68, and I joined in. We were calling for the establishment of a Black and Third World Studies department that ultimately culminated in the School of Ethnic Studies, which thrives there to this day. Over the last few years here at UUSF, we've engaged in efforts like participating with the Oakland Church in a dismantling white supremacy workshop. And it was supposed to be expanded to more members and repeated in the spring of 2020 when the pandemic lockdown derailed those plans. But since then, my education on racism and white privilege and supremacy has ramped up here at the church through classes and presentations in the forum and the humanist group, and by the books I've read in Reverend Southern's monthly book group. Books like White Fragility, How to Be an Anti-Racist, So You Want to Talk About Race, and my favorite so far, Caste by Isabel Wilkerson. Each has broadened my views and taught me about the true history of slavery, racism, Reconstruction, Jim Crow, and the impacts they've had on real people that I never learned about in school and that continue to this day. I've also have a different perspective now than I did back in 1968 when I felt compelled to help the disadvantaged, which is laudable as far as it goes. Now I realize it's our job as white people to change ourselves and our institutions in which white supremacy is deeply embedded. And yes, it's here in our congregation too. How could it not be? Previous attempts here at UUSF to widen our membership to include people of color, while well-intentioned, have not really worked in a big way. When I recently heard about the 8th principle, it felt like the pieces of the puzzle fell into place. I believe that adopting the 8th principle will provide us with a clear, well-lighted path to creating an atmosphere here that will be more welcoming to people of color. So you may be thinking to yourself, what is this 8th principle? Well, here to explain more about it is our own Mari Magaloni Ramos, who's been a member UU for 20 years and a member of our congregation for 5 years. Mari?
Thank you, Liz. My name is Maria Esther Magaloni Ramos. I go by Maria Esther or Mari, and I am first-generation Mexican-American. I am the chair of the 8th Principle Task Force to lead our congregation towards a vote to formally adopt the 8th Principle, which reads as follows. We, the member congregations of the Unitarian Universalist Association, covenant to affirm and promote, journeying towards spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and our institutions. Adopting the 8th principle will be an acknowledgement that racism has systematically been undermining the values of our other 7 principles, from diminishing the worth and dignity of every person to the impunity with which degradation of the environment is tolerated in communities that are populated by people who are Black, Indigenous, and of color. Until we confront it directly, racism will continue to undercut our efforts to bring about our Unitarian Universalist vision of a just and loving world. The time has come for every institution, without exception, to grapple with the question of racism. We are not exempt. Ask yourself, does this congregation look like the diverse, multicultural, beloved community that Unitarian Universalism aspires to create? No? It's time to ask ourselves, why not? No matter how well-intentioned we are, we have all been tarnished by racism and have work to do. The turbulent political climate and the disastrous and inequitable response to the COVID-19 pandemic make clear that we are being called at this moment to name and re-engage in the struggle against racism. Adopting the 8th principle as core to our spiritual practice will be more than a symbolic act. It will be a mainsail that, when lifted, will catch the animating force of our commitment and put our congregation directly on the path towards spiritual wholeness. Let's make clear to the world Unitarian Universalists' commitment to the work of dismantling racism and to creating diverse, multicultural, beloved community. I invite you aboard the great ship UUSF, the original love boat. We invite you to learn more about the eighth principle by looking for information in the flame and in the order of service.
And join Mari and me in the coffee hour right after this service in a special breakout room to discuss more about the eighth principle and get your questions answered.
Ship ahoy!
And with the warmth of love, we lit our chalice this morning. Our offering this morning will go to support the work of the Interfaith Movement for Human Integrity, a statewide California organization that connects people of faith to the work of social justice. Working at the intersection of spirituality and social movements, we mobilize congregations to take a stand on issues of social justice like immigration and mass incarceration. And we engage people of faith to develop their own leadership so they can stand up against racism, discrimination, and the political challenges of the day. Please use the special offering line in the payment portal to make your donation to support this work. Thank you.
I love it when people tell me what they need from me and how I can best relate to them. It's so much better than bothering or disappointing them without knowing. Just last week, a friend gave me some helpful feedback. I sent her a link about some internet drama. A podcast we both like was getting called out for not valuing the people of color on its staff. And then I sent her another link the next day with some more information about it. She responded to the second message, asking me to be mindful what I sent her and to ask her if it was a good time before sending something that might be upsetting. She said that she's found if she knows messages from someone might be stressful, she has a tendency to just ignore them, which she didn't want to do. My first reaction was surprise. I think twice before sending content with details or depictions of violence or any other especially difficult content. But I hadn't thought twice about sending yet another story of a discriminatory workplace. Of course, I'm lucky for workplace discrimination to be something that happens to other people and not something I really have to worry about. She is not. Not to mention that I am someone who checks Twitter and Facebook right before bed and right when I wake up. I drink the fire hose of what's going on in the world with reckless disregard for its impact on my mood. And that works okay for me. Regardless of my surprise, my next step was to send back a warm, thankful, and encouraging message saying that of course I would do that going forward, and thanking her for letting me know. Because it doesn't really matter what I would want. What matters is the gift that my friend gave me, of clearly communicating her needs so that I could adjust accordingly. I do my best to be mindful of how I'm acting, and to look out for cues that something is amiss. But I know that I can't be perfect. And it's even harder now that so much of my communication is happening over text. So I know that sometimes I do things that bother people, or make them less excited to spend time with me. And they keep it to themselves. I do the same when I'm bothered. Giving direct feedback is scary. It takes energy. We don't always have that. So when someone does have the courage and trust to tell me what they need from me, I do my very best to fight the instinct to be defensive. I make sure they feel heard, feel my gratitude, and feel sure that it will actually lead to me making change. And then I make it a point to follow through. This is what accountability means to me, among friends or in community. Everyone working together to meet each other's needs. Reminding people when they step out of bounds. And even more importantly, responding to those reminders with grace, humility, and genuine intent to change.